I never expected a woman twice my age to look me in the eye and whisper words that would change everything. I'm 45, but I still burn. And when she pulled me closer, I realized she wasn't just talking about herself, she was talking about us. I wasn't looking for anything that evening. Honestly, I just want a little peace. The bookstore cafe had become my favorite place to hide from the noise of the city. It was the kind of spot where time slowed down, warm lamps hanging low, the smell of ground coffee and old paper thick in the air, and quiet music humming from speakers that had probably been there since before I was born. I remember standing in the aisle that led to the back shelves, running my fingers along the spines of books, not really searching for anything in particular. That's when I noticed her. She was already there, halfway down the row, tilting her head slightly as she read the titles. Her hair fell over one side of her face, dark with a few strands of silver that caught the light in a way that made me pause. She had that kind of presence that wasn't loud, but impossible to ignore, graceful, steady, like she belonged exactly where she was. I don't know what drew me closer, curiosity, maybe, or just something instinctive. But as I stepped down the aisle, I saw her hand reach for a book at the same time mine did. Our fingers brushed, just for a second, but the warmth of her skin was immediate, surprising. She glanced up. Her eyes met mine, and in that small instant, the world seemed to shrink down to just the two of us. There was a quiet confidence in her gaze, but also a softness, a kind of openness I hadn't expected. "Go ahead," she said with a small smile, her voice low and smooth, almost like she was sharing a secret. She slid the book toward me, though her fingers lingered on the edge for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. I shook my head. "No, please. You had it first." That made her laugh, a gentle sound that carried more warmth than the overhead lights ever could. So we stood there, this odd standoff over a book neither of us really seemed to want anymore. But the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was alive. I noticed details I probably shouldn't have focused on. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the faint scent of something floral that clung to her, the subtle lines around her eyes that only deepened when she smiled. Eventually, she gave in, sliding the book back onto the shelf with a playful shake of her head. "All right then. No one gets it." We both laughed, and somehow that broke the invisible barrier between us. She asked me if I came here often, and I admitted it was my retreat from the world. She nodded knowingly, saying she liked it for the same reason, that it was one of the few places where she could breathe without anyone expecting anything from her. Her words stuck with me, even as we drifted out of the aisle and toward the cafe counter. I realized then that this woman, whose name I didn't even know yet, carried something beneath her calm surface, something unspoken but burning quietly, waiting to be noticed. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I wanted to notice it. We ended up at the cafe counter together, not quite meaning to. She ordered a black coffee, no sugar, no cream, straightforward like she didn't need anything extra. I ordered mine with too much sugar, and she teased me about it almost instantly. "Sweet tooth?" she asked, one eyebrow lifting in quiet amusement. I grinned. Or maybe I just like to soften the bitterness. Her laugh came softly, but stayed with me longer than it should have. We took our drinks and, without discussing it, sat down at the same small table tucked against the corner window. It felt natural, though I couldn't explain why. I didn't usually sit with strangers, but something about her presence, steady, composed, yet somehow inviting, made me feel like it would have been wrong to just walk away. The conversation started simply. Books, favorite authors, music that played quietly in the background. But it didn't take long before the surface gave way to deeper things. She had a way of speaking that wasn't rushed. Each word felt chosen, carried by the low, rich tone of her voice. She told me she was a history teacher, and I admitted I was still figuring out what I wanted to do. Normally, saying that made me feel small, uncertain, but with her it didn't. She just listened, nodding slightly, as though my not knowing wasn't a weakness, but a stage of life worth respecting. "I envy that sometimes," she said. "That openness, that freedom. At your age, you can still stand at the edge of the world and wonder where you'll go." At mine, she trailed off, giving a small shrug and sipping her coffee. I studied her then, not just her words, but her expression. The way her lips pressed into a faint line when she thought. The way her eyes softened when she spoke of something personal. There was confidence in her, years of knowing herself, of carrying herself with dignity. But in small moments, I caught glimpses of something else. Vulnerability she didn't fully hide. And I was drawn to it. She asked me questions, not just polite ones, but the kind that made me think, what did I fear losing? What do I want to hold on to? I fumbled for answers, and she listened without judgment, occasionally offering a quiet thought of her own. At one point, while laughing at something I said, her hand slipped lightly onto my forearm. Just for emphasis, maybe, but the contact sent a quiet current through me. Her touch wasn't hesitant, but it wasn't careless either. It was deliberate in the way only someone sure of themselves can be. And when she pulled her hand back, it felt like the absence of it left behind a small ache. We must have sat there for hours, though it didn't feel like it. The café grew quieter as the evening crept in, and the light outside shifted from golden to dusky blue. By the time we both realized how long we'd stayed, neither of us seemed ready to leave. There was something unspoken between us, a thread pulling gently, holding us in place. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew this. Conversations weren't supposed to feel this way, like music you didn't want to end, like warmth you weren't ready to let go of. And for the first time in a long time, I wanted to stay exactly where I was. It was a week later when I walked her home for the first time. The city was quieter than usual that night, the kind of silence that hangs in the air after a light rain. The pavement glistened under the street lamps, and every step echoed just a little more sharply than it should have. She lived only a few blocks from the bookstore café, and we'd fallen into the habit of leaving together. That night, though, there was something heavier in her mood. She was quieter, her laughter softer, her gaze turned inward instead of outward. I noticed it, even if she didn't say anything at first. When we reached her street, she slowed her steps. Her building was a beautiful old brownstone, the kind that carried history in its bricks. We stopped just outside the gate. She rested her hand on the iron railing and looked up at me with an expression I hadn't seen before, thoughtful, but shaded by something like doubt. You know, she said, her voice low, sometimes I wonder if we're even allowed to do this. I frowned slightly. Do what? This. She gestured between us, not with her hands, but with her eyes. These walks, these long conversations, the way I feel when I look at you. She paused, then gave a faint, almost self-conscious laugh. I'm 45. You're what, 24? 26, I said quietly. Her gaze flickered over my face as though the exact number mattered less than the gap between them. Still, for a moment, neither of us spoke. The street was hushed around us, just the faint hum of a car in the distance, the whisper of wind moving through the trees. Finally, she added, softer now, people would talk. They always do. They'd see me as, she shook her head, too old, desperate maybe, you as too young, careless. It's easier to pretend none of this is there. Her words hung between us, raw and unpolished, and I felt something tighten in my chest. She wasn't wrong. I'd thought about it too, the glances, the questions, the way people would try to make sense of us. But standing there, looking at her, none of it seemed to matter. She reached for the doorknob, her fingers brushing the cool brass, but I saw the slightest tremor in her hand. Before I could think, I reached out and covered her hand with mine. My thumb moved instinctively, brushing over her knuckles in a slow, steady motion. Her eyes lifted to mine, startled at first, then softening. For that brief moment, her doubt faded, replaced by something quieter, relief, maybe. I don't care what they'd say, I told her, my voice firmer than I expected. I care about this. About you. She drew in a breath, not quite steady, and then gave a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. You say that now. Maybe she didn't believe me yet. Maybe she couldn't. But I meant it. I knew I did. When she finally stepped inside, I stayed on the sidewalk a little longer, staring at the door, feeling the weight of her words settle into me. This wasn't going to be simple. But I wasn't looking for simple. I was looking for her. The rain started just as I was leaving work. Not the hard, driving kind that makes you run for cover, but the steady, soaking kind that drapes the whole city in silver. By the time I reached her street, I was damp enough that I probably looked like I'd been caught in a storm. She opened the door before I even knocked, as if she'd been waiting. Her expression softened when she saw me. Amused, maybe, but not surprised. "You're drenched," she said, stepping aside. I shrugged and slipped inside. The warmth of her apartment wrapped around me instantly. Soft light from the lamps, the faint scent of jasmine tea, the muffled sound of rain pattering against the windows. It was the kind of space that felt lived in, filled with books and framed photographs, and the kind of details that tell you someone has a history worth listening to. She handed me a towel, her fingers brushing mine as she did. That small touch, almost nothing, still managed to stir something in me. I dried my hair awkwardly while she moved about the room with practiced ease, pouring 2 cups of tea, setting them on the low table. We settled on the couch. The rain filled the silence, steady and unrelenting, as though it was giving us permission not to rush. For a while, we talked about nothing important. Work, a movie she'd watched recently, my clumsy attempt at cooking the night before. But then her voice grew quieter, her gaze drifting toward the window where rivulets of water blurred the city lights outside. "You know," she said, her words slow and deliberate, "sometimes I think I feel things too deeply." I tilted my head. "Too deeply?" She gave a faint smile, but it didn't last. "It sounds strange, I know, but I've spent years trying to keep myself contained. Strong, collected. People expect that from me. They don't want to see the cracks. But underneath," she paused, drawing in a breath, "underneath, I feel everything. Every loss, every hope, every doubt. Sometimes it scares me." I didn't answer right away. The way she spoke, steady on the surface, but breaking just enough to show me the weight she carried. It stirred something protective in me. She turned her head then, finally meeting my eyes. The vulnerability there caught me off guard. She wasn't asking for reassurance. She wasn't even asking for understanding. She was just letting me see her without the armor. I leaned forward slightly. "That doesn't scare me," I said. My voice came out softer than I intended. "It makes me want to know you more." Her breath caught, almost imperceptibly. Then, slowly, she reached up and brushed a damp strand of hair from my forehead. Her fingers lingered longer than necessary, the touch light but deliberate. We stayed there, the space between us charged with everything unspoken. The rain pressed against the windows like a secret witness, and in that moment, it felt as though the whole world had narrowed to just her hand in my hair, her eyes locked on mine, and the truth we were both circling but hadn't yet dared to claim. And though neither of us moved closer, neither of us pulled away. The shift happened on a night that seemed almost ordinary. We were back at her place, another evening of tea and conversation, the kind of rhythm we'd fallen into without naming it. But there was something different about her that night, a restless energy in the way she moved, as though her calm veneer had worn thin. She poured wine instead of tea, just 2 glasses, a deep red that glowed in the lamplight. She handed me mine without a word and settled into the chair opposite me. For a while, we talked about work again, about trivial things, but her mind was somewhere else. I could see it in the way her gaze drifted, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. Finally, she set her glass down and leaned back, exhaling a long breath. "Do you ever wonder what people see when they look at me?" I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" She tilted her head, studying me with a half-smile that wasn't really a smile. "They see a woman who's supposed to have it all figured out. A woman who's strong, who doesn't need anyone. They don't see the rest of it, the parts that still ache, still want." Her voice softened, almost as though she were speaking to herself more than to me. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "And what do you see?" Her eyes met mine then, sharp and unflinching. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, in a voice low enough to be a secret, she said, "I'm 45, but I still burn." The words hung in the air between us, fragile and fierce all at once. My chest tightened. I couldn't look away from her, from the rawness in her eyes, from the tremor in her breath, as if saying it had cost her something. Before I could respond, she stood, slowly, Deliberately, she crossed the space between us. My pulse quickened with every step she took. She stopped just in front of me, close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, close enough that I could smell the faint sweetness of her perfume mixed with the wine. Her hand lifted, hesitating for the briefest second before it curled lightly into the fabric of my shirt. Not pulling, not demanding, just holding as though she needed the anchor. The weight of her touch was electric. I felt it spread through me, steady and undeniable. I looked up at her, and the world seemed to slow. Her expression was not playful, not casual. It was raw, almost defiant, as if daring me to see her, all of her, without flinching. I raised my hand and covered hers where it rested on my chest. My thumb traced the back of her hand gently, reassuringly. "I see it," I whispered. "I feel it." Her breath caught, her lips parting as though she might say something more, but she didn't. Instead, she stayed there, standing close, her forehead nearly brushing mine, the warmth of her presence wrapping around me like fire and shelter all at once. In that moment, there was no age gap, no judgment, no world outside her living room. There was only her truth, and my choice to hold it, to hold her. After that night, the night she whispered those words, the night she pulled me closer, something shifted between us. It wasn't as if we suddenly became something defined, but the unspoken tension no longer hid in the shadows. It lingered in every glance, every pause, every brush of touch that neither of us could pretend away. A week later, we found ourselves on our couch again. The rain had passed, replaced by a crisp, clear evening. The city outside was alive with faint sounds, the hum of traffic, the distant call of a siren. But inside her apartment, it was still, warm, safe. She sat at one end of the couch, a book open in her lap. I was at the other, pretending to read, but watching her more than the words in front of me. The lamplight softened the edges of her features, highlighting the curve of her cheek, the steady focus in her eyes. After a while, she lowered the book and looked at me. There was no smile this time, just a quiet searching in her gaze. "I keep thinking," she said, "that this shouldn't be happening. That I should be wiser, stronger, more disciplined." I set my book aside, leaning toward her. "And do you believe that?" She exhaled, a shaky laugh slipping out. "Part of me does." The other part, her voice faded, but her eyes stayed on me. I crossed the space between us, not with a rush, but slowly, so she could stop me if she wanted. I sat close, close enough that our knees brushed lightly. That single point of contact sent a shiver up my leg, subtle but unmistakable. "I don't want you to be stronger against this," I said softly. "I want you to let yourself be here, with me." Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she tilted her head, her eyes searching mine, as if she needed to be certain I understood what I was asking. Then, carefully, she let her head rest against my shoulder. It was such a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of all her hesitation, all her unspoken fear. I felt the warmth of her cheek through the thin fabric of my shirt, the soft pressure of her body leaning just enough into mine. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay steady, to give her the space to choose. My arm moved almost on instinct, wrapping around her shoulders, drawing her in gently. She didn't resist. In fact, I felt her exhale, long and slow, like a breath she'd been holding for years. In that stillness, something passed between us, not just attraction, not just desire, but a quiet decision. We weren't stumbling into this anymore. We were stepping into it together. Her hand found mine where it rested on her arm. Our fingers wove together, slow and deliberate, and she squeezed once firm, a silent promise. And in that moment, I knew, whatever came next, however complicated it might be, we had chosen each other. Weeks passed, and life quietly reshaped itself around us. What began as chance meetings and hesitant conversations became a rhythm, a steady presence in each other's days. I didn't have to question whether I would see her. It simply happened, as natural as breathing. One evening, we walked together through the park near her home. Autumn had begun to lay its hand on the city. The air was cooler, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves. The path was lined with trees that rustled in the evening breeze, their branches arching overhead like a cathedral made of gold and rust. She walked beside me, her arm brushing mine every few steps. It was a simple thing, but every touch was a reminder. She was here, with me, not pulling away anymore. At one point, she slowed, glancing at a group of people sitting on a bench nearby. Younger couples laughing, wrapped up in each other without a care in the world. I saw the flicker in her eyes, that old hesitation, the ghost of doubt she hadn't completely left behind. I slipped my hand into hers. Our fingers laced together easily, naturally, as though we'd been doing it for years. I gave her hand a light squeeze, steady and certain. She looked at me then, her lips curving into a small smile, not the practiced kind she used with others, but the one that came from somewhere deeper. "You make this feel possible," she whispered. I stopped walking and turned toward her fully. The lamplight above spilled over her hair, catching the silver strands and making them glow like threads of light. I studied her face, the strength etched into it, the lines that told her story, the quiet vulnerability she still tried to hide. And I thought, not for the first time, that she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. "It's more than possible," I said gently. "It's real, and I want it. I want you." For a long moment, she just looked at me, her eyes searching mine as if testing every word for its weight. Then she stepped closer, her free hand lifting to rest against my chest. I felt the warmth of her palm through my jacket, steady against my heartbeat. "Then we'll stop questioning it," she murmured. The world around us kept moving. Footsteps on the path, laughter from the benches, the rustle of leaves overhead. But in that moment, it felt like we stood in our own quiet circle of light. We continued walking, hand in hand, no longer hiding in corners or worrying about who might see. The evening deepened into night, and the city lights blinked awake in the distance. But the warmth between us was enough to guide the way. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was chasing something uncertain. I felt like I had found it, a steady flame, burning quietly but endlessly, lighting the path we had chosen together. And as I looked at her, fingers entwined with mine, I knew this wasn't the end of story. It was the beginning of one we would write together.